Where do both of you see reporting using 360 photos going?
The basis of any good report is to capture as much data as possible.
What are some of the benefits of drones versus 360 photos?
The other things in terms of value is actually what's going on around the site.
With these new tools coming into the construction industry, you actually start to build your entire pipeline around those tools.
Welcome to the BIM Heroes podcast. In this episode, we will be discussing the state of photo progress documentation in terms of 360 photos and drones. I'm going to be joined by Charlie and Osama from Evercam. Welcome, guys. Would you both introduce yourselves?
Hi, Cody. My name is Charlie Solan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer with Evercam. Been with the company now over 3 years. Prior to working in Evercam, I worked in a number of different companies. A lot of them were software companies with a hardware element of it. And I suppose the big thing that drew me to working at Evercam was about 12 years ago, I was involved in an early stage of my career with a large construction project. And that involved me putting a camera to watch it. So I only have one video on YouTube. It's actually a time-lapse video. And it turned out 12 years later on, stumbled across Evercam, and it was like, okay, these guys are doing what I was using this camera for 12 years ago. So the problems we had are now being solved with this new technology. And it was just like, yeah, this is a good fit. I know what they're looking to try and achieve. I know what the pain points are. And it was just a good time to move across then.
Hi, everyone. My name is Osama Bonner. I'm the head of the 3D department at Evercam. So we basically handle everything related to BIM, drone, 360, and everything in between. I joined Evercam around 3.5 years ago, and it was quite a ride going from a camera-centric system to actually building slowly around those drone 360 BIM systems and having them all kind of talk to each other. So that was quite a journey for us up until now.
Where do both of you believe the state of photo progress documentation is at this point?
If I look at it from the slightly less technical piece, I'll let Osama get into the specifics. What I see it is a piece where the capture element in terms of the barrier to entry is coming down all the time. So if you think about just the physical elements of capturing imagery on site, you now have what was the static fixed position cameras. They were always there in some form, or traditionally just used for security, but now we've taken it on that next step to use it more for progress managing. What you now see, though, with the 360 cameras, when you are now looking at, I suppose I have the devices here myself, like a 360 camera that's the size of your hand, it's literally easy to walk around. You put it on a selfie stick. All of a sudden, you're capturing all that information internally. And then again, you're looking at a drone. These are standards. They're not that big in terms of 250 grams. You now are able to get things from like 100 meters to 300 meter images. So that barrier to entry, both in terms of the physical size of the hardware, has significantly decreased. And I would also say the technical speciality has also come down. So when I look at 360, and just reference for your listeners, I'm in the middle of completely renovating my own house. So I'm currently living on site, but not in the house itself. This is full renovation. But I'm able to just put a camera in. I'm not a specialist in terms of being a 360 specialist, but I can do all this capture. Similarly, a drone, I can do the drone, pop it up, it does the mapping automatically, and then I hand it to the specialist very quickly and upload it through the platform. And now I have a fully interactive 360 internal image or a 3D model, where I think the key thing is that the capture is ahead of the analysis, but the analysis in practical terms, software industry will work much faster than hardware. So although the capture and the volume has come down, the really exciting thing is that by the time certain projects that might have been started today and been visualized today is what the state of play will be in like 12 months, 18 months. Think what that imagery that you've captured, not necessarily knowing what you were going to do with it, will look like in 12 to 18 months. So from my side, as a user experience, it is that key thing of the barrier to entry has come down, the volume and the hardware has got much smaller, and the actual requirements and skill sets has reduced. So it's just an easier accessible route to get this information.
From my side of the equation, I tend to focus a lot more on the capture side of things. So I'm noticing that there is like basically three schools of thought when it comes to capturing a 360 system. So you either do plain images where you basically tell the system, here's where I am, I take a photo, I move to the next location, here's where I am, etc., etc. Many providers do it this way. Or you use basically a video system where you just start the video, start working around your construction site, and the system will handle the rest, whether that's extracting the images, knowing where you are, etc. Or the more advanced or even costly systems where it's a combination between images and LiDAR. So they do like an image extraction, but also they use like advanced LiDAR systems in order to get depth estimation and 3D reconstruction, photogrammetry and all that. So it's very interesting to see how different systems are reacting, or how different pipelines are reacting to the way you input that data, and also the cost of hardware versus how difficult it is to actually finish a single walkthrough using those three different main methods of capturing.
Talking directly about 360 photos piece, and then we'll get into the drones piece. What do you feel is the greatest benefit of 360 photo projects?
For me, looking at it again, the ease of capture is so much faster than if you think like the alternative now at the moment is just you have your phone. So you're inside and you're trying to take your phone, you're taking the snapshots. Like the number of images you just physically would need to take to replicate what you can capture in a 1-minute walkthrough, you're talking thousands. And that's no exaggeration to be able to say that. So that is the first part. The second part, again, I would say is just the fact of being able to manipulate that dynamic environment that, you know, if you take that static image, sometimes you might go, oh, geez, if only I could have moved that like 2 inches to the left, like, or I could see what's around that corner. That's really where you are now taking data capture from being the static fixed position of where you just happen to be internally to being this, I can go and explore. And if I was to use the analogy of the evolution that you saw within computer games, where you went from being that very linear view to the open world play, that you weren't stuck by where you had to stay within the game, you can go and explore the environment around you. That is what you're seeing now with something like 360. You're getting that Google Earth effect. You can just go off piste, for want of a better description, and you want to look around the corner. And it becomes, you're not restricting the user to what you want to see. You're capturing everything, and they then have that independence, and you're empowering them to go off and explore. So if your engineer wants to look at the structural joist to see what's happened, well, he can go or she can go and look at that area. But if you have somebody else, in terms of the architects, wants to inspect the insulation that's there and has that been up to spec, well, they can go on the same platform. You don't need different photographs. You don't need somebody to have gone and have 3 or 4 people taking different images. You have one person, they've done the route, they capture all this information, and then it's up to the actual specialist who can go off and look at what they want to do. Because what a health and safety officer might want to look at is not what, as I say, the engineer or the builder wants to look at, or even the client, because the client might just want to say, well, what's everything just looking like internally? They don't want to go into the minutiae. It's like, oh, has anything actually happened? So that's where I think that value is coming in.
From my point of view, I like to focus on the timeline side of things, where as you're walking and you're capturing really interesting stuff, I like to think of it as the old cartoon, The Magic Bus, where they go into the human anatomy and they see how things are looking from the inside. So you can imagine you don't have to tear down a wall in order to see what's inside of it. You just had like a few 360 captures from a few months ago, and you not only see how things were built for training purposes or for site reviews or whatever, but you also get to choose the exact point in time, especially if you have frequent walkthroughs, you get to choose the exact point in time where you want to see the state of your project. And just thinking how far technology has gotten us in the last few years in terms of making this available to everybody almost at such a low level of entry, it's really exciting to see, and really interesting to see how it evolves in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big points that both of you made, is that low cost, easy of use. So being able to pick up that, put it on a hard hat and use it for different types of people. And the other piece, Charlie, I think, we could go into as well, is that inspection side of things. Because a lot of times when you're doing inspection, there's different people looking at different things. But even on another front of that is the point in which you might not inspect everything that day and say, okay, I need to go back and see if I missed something. And a lot of times you did miss something, and you got that captured so that you can go back and look at that. Talk a little bit about that front of things.
If I use the personal experience at the moment, my engineer it's a small domestic project, so you're not going to have an engineer on site every day. He lives about an hour and a half away. So what I'm able to do is, capture all the stuff that's going on, and he can, at his own leisure, go and inspect it and see what's happened and has the work been done up to spec, rather than having to come down on site, because there's still a huge amount of requirements with inspections with the mindset of, oh, I have to physically be on site. No, this is where the value is with the 360 camera. The flexibility of being able to see around corners. If you can get we were just having this conversation. I mean, if you can get the camera into a duct or a space, whether it's on a selfie stick or you just happen to stick your head in, you can capture all of this stuff. So you literally can see behind the walls. And with the inspection piece, it's actually interesting you mentioned that notion of you can go back and look at things. Sometimes so we're just thinking myself, so we've poured the floors and there's pipe work that goes in that isn't going to be looked at for another 6 months, because the roof had to be worked on. And to a certain extent, by the time that 6 months comes around again, who's remembered what was done? And the fact that you can now, and Osama will talk to it, tag that information and do that snapshot that this was really important and somebody needs to remember this in 6 months' time when the second fix is coming back in or something else has been done. That's what's the value of it. And I think that it gets rid of that. And I really think that's a really important part of a lot of really good projects are successful because of good people, not necessarily good processes, if that makes sense. If you're a really good, successful construction team, it's those individuals have come together. But if we're able to replicate that information and you de-risk it by being able to say you capture all that information all the time, it really allows the risk level to come down for those inspections, Cody, because that individual could have made an observation in November, and 6 months later, when you've gone to come back again, they don't have to try and remember and go back through a folder of folders of photographs. They just literally bring up that image and go, it's geolocated. You've overlaid the image and go, okay, was that thing actually done? So, and again, and I think an important piece is that the number of inspections vary depending on the industry. So the engineers are looking for the structural loading. The what you call it, the health and safety, they're doing daily inspections. They may, as you say, you may miss something that somebody wants to go back through and go, did I miss, like there was a ladder not secured, or there was a behavior I didn't notice? Because even when you're on site, you miss stuff. You can physically look, but it's very hard to mentally be tuned into every aspect. And this goes back to that point we're talking about, that you don't have to have the specialist on site to do that inspection. You're literally saying, get the 18-year-old, the new guy on site whose only job is to make sure he follows the path accurately, doesn't trip up over anything, because, I mean, again, going back to that nature of the hardware being smaller, construction sites being really dynamic. And then your specialists who are back in the office can do those slow progress and go zoom in, manipulate the image, mark it up, ask questions. And then, like, it won't replace a full on-site inspection completely, but it certainly reduces the need for the amount of them. And fundamentally, what it does that no physical on-site inspection can do is it records it in a fixed manner that will never change. So I think that's where I see it just being that real complementary tool to the inspections, and gives that foolproof record that it's not down to, oh, I thought I saw this or I didn't see it. Like, no, that is exactly what happened.
Yeah, I think I agree with Charlie on most things, and obviously he's he has been feeding us an incredible amount of information in this construction project that he talks about, where he's not only given us like real life cases of construction, but he's also trying to make the construction around this process. So before, like, you have a couple of people coming down the site, they talk, etc., and that's it. And then if something goes wrong, you have to talk to those people again, etc., etc. But with these new tools coming into the construction industry, you actually start to build your entire pipeline around those tools. So instead of just like having those people over, you're like, okay, where can I minimize site visits? Where can I minimize people talking to each other? Where can I make this capture system the central node of everything that is happening on my construction site? Whether that's, like Charlie mentioned a moment ago, tagging, whether that's using like inspection tools like measuring, or whether that's just simply visualization, making sure that everything has worked out for the best. So I think the fact that these systems are evolving to become the central point of how construction is done over time, and we've seen this trend, I believe, 20 or 30 years ago when AutoCAD came to life, and people started to actually mimic or actually even evolve the way they do construction to fit AutoCAD in this industry. And then slowly the BIM came into life, and people started to actually try to take the BIM into consideration when doing the construction phases. So planning has evolved, the construction itself has evolved, and now I think we are in the era where data output from set constructions will evolve to something new, something that nobody has ever thought of before. And you see construction as an industry or as a line of work has existed for thousands of years, but it's really fascinating that we exist in an era where just 30 years ago, this whole boom of technology has started to impact this industry. And yeah, like I said, it's pretty exciting to see.
What do you feel is the biggest challenges on the hardware front and the software front? I can see on the hardware front, from my experience, one, with pictures at times, you have to be careful of, let's say, darker conditions, because that's just an inherent issue with pictures, is they got to have light to get a solid picture out of. And then the other piece on the hardware front is a lot of people, with a camera on their head, they look a little weird. So it's kind of a barrier there. But just wanted to talk through some of the challenges you guys have seen on both fronts.
If I take just with the 360, one of the biggest barriers has actually come down, as I mentioned earlier on, is the size. The size of what the cameras would have been. Like, there still are, depending on the systems, they're being used, Matterport and stuff like that have that real high resolution imagery. But you're on that tripod. There's quite a physical just piece of hardware to move around. The fact that you've got something like the Insta360 cameras that are so quick and deployable, that is, and quite robust. Like, they're not going to break, because I mean, anything when it comes to hardware, and we see this with our fixed position cameras as much as everything else. Construction sites are not delicate places. They don't do well with delicate pieces of technology. So what the hardware has got to be robust, has got to be able to be thrown around. Somebody throws it in a drawer and not crack or damage. So that's definitely a barrier for any piece of hardware or any piece of hardware that has to operate on a construction site. The bit of walking around and you look a little bit odd, yeah, there is a little bit of it, but funny enough, to be honest, once you kind of get going at it, nobody pays much attention. If it's got the selfie stick, it's going to go there. I do feel it's moving in a direction that's ultimately going to come down to phones as much as everything else. That there will be a phone with an app that, although it's not a 360 camera in terms of physical two lenses, it will render a way that will just be a case of you're walking around with your phone rather than walking around with a camera. But I think it'll get to a point that if the value is returned, that barrier will be overcome because of just normalizing that everybody does it. So, I mean, to go to the extremes of it, people thought it was strange not all that long ago if you saw people walking around with construction and hard hats, because that was not the norm in a lot of safety. Now it's just the norm. That's what you do. So I think adoption will drive normalization, and that will get rid of that barrier. So the two pieces: one, just the physical conditions, that hardware challenge. I think that has been well overcome, or at least in the process of it, and the cultural adoption will drive normalization.
From a hardware perspective, I'd like to add that not necessarily hardware, technically hardware, but we've seen lots of people feel a little bit funny, especially during that first walk around. And then the problem with that is the path that they decide to take is basically dictating the path for everybody that comes after them. So the human elements, like Charlie says, they don't feel normal doing it, especially if they're walking around with the selfie stick rather than the thing on the hard hat. So it feels like after 2 or 3 walkthroughs, it will get fixed. But in my opinion, after the company has used it on more than one project, it also, like, that culture propagates around the team, and they're like, oh yeah, we're going to use 360 next time. It's no problem. We've done it before, etc. So that's number one. Number two, I do hear you, Cody. Like, the site conditions are definitely a major obstacle, especially when you have, for example, electricity wires, water, like dark spots or spots that don't have really good light conditions. That can be difficult both for the human and for the photogrammetry engine doing the work in the background, or even the extraction system that takes those images. Sometimes the images tend to be blurry. But I think as the hardware keeps getting better and better, I think it will be like we will reach a system where everything is autonomous and the human doesn't have to be the funny thing doing this capture. For example, when you look at robo dogs from Boston Dynamics or whatever, they're now studying how to do that whole autonomous walkthrough system. And it's really interesting to see that humans in maybe 10 or 15 years will no longer have to do the walkthrough themselves. They will just send an autonomous system and it will do it for them. And from a software perspective, I find it quite interesting to see how the whole documentation system meets the construction system. So you have like a system that was rigid for years and a system that didn't want to or fought evolution for quite a number of years. And then you have a system that every year you have like 12 or 15 new technologies to take into consideration, and how those two systems merge, old versus new and rigid versus flexible. It's really interesting to be in the heart of it, trying to work out, like how do we incorporate a system that haven't changed in the last 500 years with a system that quite literally was born yesterday. So from a software perspective, how to consolidate these two mindsets or architectures is a really big obstacle. And also you have to take into consideration that most of the time when you're talking about a construction site, especially for mega constructions, like site safety, security, and secrecy, let's call it, is a big thing. So you have to find a way to store those data in a rather flexible and accessible way, but also to be super secure, to take into consideration different roles and different permissions and how users tend to share data with each other. You have to make the system be able to talk to as many people as possible, but not to the wrong people, etc., etc. And I do realize most industries have this as a problem, but when it comes to construction, the bills get way high compared to other industries, and the cost of making like mistakes or failing is really high. So you find, like people tiptoeing around these obstacles. So yeah, that's my opinion around that.
So the next question I have is going into the tools of 360 cameras and what you guys have developed at Evercam with your system. Two of the biggest things in 360 photos, once you have done the walk and the path that you've created, it comes back and you can start the comparison between, let's say, two walks, or you could start to tag. Let's just discuss a little bit about that.
So again, from a user perspective, and I'll let Osama get into more specifics, the value of the compare feature it's one of those things that I think Osama will be talking about, how it's replicated through all our products. So whether it's fixed position or drone, it's been able to see this is what it did like, this is what it looks like now. And one of the examples that we'll show at some stage that really showed it up was when the underfloor heating went in the house, where I've done 360 walkthroughs. And this is where AI will be, we'll get to that process where you're able to see what looks like the one in January and the one in February looks exactly the same when I take the first and the third one. And you wouldn't be able to visually identify that much has changed if you had not seen that somebody had poured the actual screed, because ultimately it's only like whatever, 60, 80 mil. So it's not visually obvious that something significant has happened. It's probably one of the biggest things. So having that capacity to track all that imagery and compare it is massive. And I think that is, we're seeing that, and Osama will be able to touch to it in terms of our timeline with our fixed position cameras, of being able to start using AI to identify automatically changes in the imagery. And I think that will be the next evolution with 360 as we get those core functionalities of capture. Then it's going to be, manual comparison, so a manual analysis of exploring, and you can manipulate and follow the paths and do the manual comparisons, with the end result that we should be able to generate out reports that says, this was done on day A, this was done on day B, here's what's actually changed within that imagery. And the more we learn about it and the more our models become evolved, the better we're going to be able to generate that. It isn't a case of, oh, well, something was added and something was taken away. It was like this piping was added and this electrical work, because it's going to start identifying what that actually is, that it's like that's a plumbing pipe as opposed to an electrical duct. So I see that's where the what we have as well as to where we're going from it. So Sam, if you want to maybe to touch more on the specific roadmap for it.
So obviously you have to take into consideration that one of the biggest problems when you're doing a timeline or when you're talking about compare is you really want to see the same location, the same spot, the same path across time, so that you can actually get the best out of that comparison. And when you're thinking, again, this is a really interesting problem that we dealt with because we come from a fixed position camera background going into other products as compared to other companies that didn't necessarily go through that route. When you're thinking about the fixed position camera, the compare is basically, it solves itself. The camera doesn't move, you just have images overlaid on top of images and so on and so forth, and you just compare between them. But when you're doing something that moves, like the 360 camera on top of the hard hat or on the selfie stick, you have to take into consideration that we want as much as possible to walk the same path around the construction site, which is sometimes tricky because paths get blocked, walls get like built, etc. So that's like a very interesting problem to solve at first. And then the whole pipeline should be, I capture something, I process it, I look at it, I tag it or annotate it, and then I export it or report it, which hopefully the last node feeding back to my capture, feeding back to my build, feeding back to my annotation, etc. So the way we're trying to do this is we tag a 360 image, but what we're really trying to achieve is you tag an entity in the Evercam platform. So we're no longer talking about just tagging a 360 image as like an asset, but you're trying to create a 3D geolocated point of information in time, in space, and then no matter which input system you're using in order to do that, the platform will take care of it. So if you're tagging a 360 interior and the camera happens to be near that, the tag should be visible from that camera. If the camera happens to be visible from the drone should be able to capture that tag as well. The BIM should be able to see where that tag is in something that will be built eventually or is already built, etc. So thinking about compare and tags in any other system is fundamentally simple when you really think about it. But thinking about it when every system is talking to every other system in the platform, things start to get exponentially more complicated and also exponentially more interesting.
So that's a great lead into my next question to both of you. One of the big things that we talked about earlier, Osama, was on the BIM side of things. Do you see that connection between the BIM model and 360 photographs being developed out in different ways?
Interesting question in terms of being developed in different ways. I think I will go back to my initial statement of how do you capture the data. So if you're doing only 360 photos and nothing else, then basically the link between the two systems will be around comparison, how it's supposed to look versus how it looked. And you are quite limited because with only 360 images and a small number of them, usually in a floor or in a walkthrough, you don't get really that much details around depth estimation, measuring the 3D side of things, etc. Then when you introduce video or LiDAR, things get a lot more interesting. You get, for example, reconstructions. Now there are companies out there doing AI-based reconstructions of your interior versus your BIM. So they take your BIM, they take your 360 reconstruction of the interior, and they basically align the two, and they tell you that, okay, this pipe from the BIM is actually this pipe that you're looking at in this image right now. And it opens up a whole new avenue of annotation, clash detection, measuring, volumetrics, like counting, whatever you want to do. So the fact that we are actively trying to incorporate all of these in a single platform is what I think gives like a lot of value in the Evercam products. And hopefully down the road, not only will the BIM be like a central piece of how everything works, but it hopefully will be able to take automatically live feed from these 360 images or videos as they come in. So they go through the system, the AI detects them, creates a 3D model for them, and then the BIM hopefully will be updated in real time to fit those needs. So if for example, there is a delay, your timeline animation will instantly be edited automatically to fit that delay so that everything makes sense going forward. If there is actually things being done ahead of time, also that will be taken into consideration. If you use less concrete that you were supposed to use, there will be like a flag saying, okay, this was supposed to be 3 cubic meters of concrete rather than 2, etc. So these are just a few use cases that we think will happen in the next few months or even years.
And Charlie, from your point of view?
Where I just see it from it is with the 360, and we'll be talking as well later on about the drone, we've so many new ways of capturing data, but we actually still have an pre-existing problem that's always in most organizations, particularly in construction, is silos. So now we have new silos. We have the new silo of BIM. We have the silo of the CAD drawings. We have the silo of just the organizational knowledge that's in someone's head. So yes, capturing data is great, but if that data isn't getting an opportunity to overlay with itself, that's the problem. So even if you go back to that image of the 360, is rather than just one image that has no connection to the other image that was taken on the same day, they're all interacted. So you've broken down the silos between the images because you can explore. What Osama's talking about there, and I think that's the real challenge we're trying to crack here by taking all these data sources, bringing them all together, is there won't just be silos, there will be one. There'll be one silo then that people can interact with however they see fit. And through that, then you will have the intelligence coming in. But even if we did nothing else, even if there was no form of analytics and no anything smart, but we just allow normal individuals to, in a construction site, explore all these different images. They have the BIM. You have, I just want, that analogy of seeing what's the past, the present, the future in a really seamless manner. That unlocks great potential. It really raises the opportunity to go, okay, I don't need to be on site all the time, because some of the best mistakes get avoided, either usually are prevented when somebody's on site having, they happen to be chatting to the guy who's pouring the concrete or the engineer, and they go, oh, I thought this, and you're standing together looking at that one beam, and now we can replicate that in a digital way. And I think that's the really exciting piece with the platform piece that Osama has been speaking about. And with the 360, as Osama mentioned, like the fixed position camera makes the things of compare a lot easier. The drone is similar because it's, you're flying the exact same pattern. The big challenges with the 360 is getting that geolocation connected. But when you crack that and you connect it with the fixed position and you connect it with the drone, all of a sudden you're just getting this absolute, three-dimensional look. And that is the fourth dimension being time, and you really bring it into one place. You're not having to jump between multiple different apps. And I think that's what we're trying to really work on, is break down that app fatigue, I suppose, that happens in a lot of technologies, but that phones really do well, like the Android, Apple. You just go to the one piece of hardware and you can access all your different pieces in the one location. You don't have your printer or your camera and your fax machine and your telephone. They're all in one place. So we're trying to do that from a digital perspective as it relates to data generated on construction sites.
Yeah, which leads to one of the biggest things and needs our industry is reporting and how we do report. Where do both of you see reporting using 360 photos going? And is that on the analytics side, or is that more self-reporting?
I'll take that one just again from a user point of view, of where I think the 360 has one of the most obvious benefits from it is just the snagging. Just you're walking around, you're able to see that site, you're able to snag, you're able to do your voice notes, you do your commentary. And I think one of the pieces is you're able to capture all the information in what is less than ideal circumstances. So, but you can capture the data in a raw format and bring it back to the office so you can mark up your notes. So the fact that we will get to a stage that we will be able to generate a snag list from the pictures and the comments, and the aim within the timeline is that will be generated and printed off, and you then have that report easily accessible. The other reporting piece that will eventually come in is that if we get that accuracy of dimensions and measurements, the depth was done, like you're going to be able to say, okay, please confirm X, Y, and Z was done out of this. Did the 75 mil versus the 55 mil of insulation board go in? Like, because all those things, again, that notion, if you keep capturing the same data in different variations, even if you don't have the way of analyzing it today, you will in the future, because that's the way it's going on. So practically right now, that notion of just the snag lists, people having to do their progress reports, that reporting piece will come there. And I feel that the self-reporting, or rather the automatic reporting, you get the data, that the technology is moving that fast. It will get there in the next couple of months or the next 12 months. I see that moving forward a lot.
I would like to iterate on a point that Charlie mentioned in terms of getting a lot of data in and then deciding what kind of reports we're building. The reports will be directly related to which persona is interested in the report. So an accountant would be interested in a drastically different report than somebody in the site trying to count, for example, how many pillars have been erected today, for example. So I think the basis of any good report is to capture as much data as possible, because creating the report itself, technically speaking, or even from a development point of view, is not that difficult. But capturing the data, having it ready, capturing it from different angles is the challenge. So if you think about it, a general report included, for example, for the state of your entire 360 project is a really good thing to have on any construction project. But a general report included from all different major platforms of capture for that day, give me, for example, what the fixed position camera has captured, what the weather system was like, what the 360 captured, what the drone captured, what the BIM was saying we're supposed to be in. So that is a really interesting report, because at a glance, I can know, am I ahead of time, behind schedule? Am I over cost, under budget? Am I, so the in my opinion, as these things keep building and talking to each other, the general report that would give me basically everything that I need to know or predict my needs in the future, that's really the type of report that we're trying to build in this platform.
Kind of switching gears to drones now. 360 for a long time has always been, on site, whether it was outside or inside the building, because that's what its real benefit was. On the other side of the equation is drones. And drones are great on the outside for the most part because they're looking at a larger area. And it's a lot harder to, let's say, fly a drone inside to do a lot of the things that 360 photos would do. What are some of the benefits of drones versus 360 photos?
If I just take just the value of where we bring together the drone, the fixed position cameras, and the 360 is when I'm now talking to customers, I'm able to talk about the notion of two axes. There's the axis of time, which is the past, the present, and the future. So we have our recordings, we have our live view, and we have our BIM models. And now we're able to talk about the vertical axis of drone, fixed position, and 360. So I can say to somebody, again, if I'm talking about, say, for the development of the roof, so we're just re-roofing, I'm able to say, here's what the drone imagery was. Now, it's a smaller project, so from 30 meters. Within that, I can see the full model of what's been done from it and capture all the information. I can then see from a fixed position what was actually being done in real time. And then being able to see in the 360, I can see underneath inside the house. So you're able to give that notion of, the barriers, the physical barriers disappear because just because I'm on one end of the roof or a wall, I can now transition straight through it. I can just see what's on the other side of it, like you can do on a digital model. But now in the real world capture, we're breaking down those barriers. Practically, the things I see from inspection purposes, even though I'm on site, I still have to climb a ladder or have to get up on scaffolding to see what's actually happening on the roof. The fact that you can do that safely remotely, one of the things I was showing is being able to see that there's two small elements of the extensions of all flat roofs. There's gullies that are allowing water to drain away. I'm able to inspect them visually just from the comfort of my home. I can look and see were they actually done. I don't have to physically climb a ladder or climb scaffolding to see were the fall in it done correctly. I can also see that when the actual roofs were being laid, were they done properly? Was there was the debris left around there? Because if they get punctured in 3 months' time and I've got a leak, what am I going to use as the reference back to the builder and go, here, I could see what your site was doing at the time they were being laid. Therefore, I have questions to be asked, or I'm going to ask some questions, or I'm going to say I'm happy with it. So the drone imagery for me, for the physical building, is the fact of being able to see what was constructed, how it was being done at that time for that one snapshot. And I think the frequency is a big piece we come back to with 360 and drone. The greater the frequency, especially as you have the greater activity, the better the value those images are going to be because you're having more comparison purposes. The other thing is in terms of value is actually what's going on around the site and the physical building. So is it a clean site? Is it being maintained? What's your stockpiles? And Osama, I'm sure, is going to talk about that in a second in terms of the features. So you have the physical building itself, but what's happening in that environment in the 50 meters, the 100 meters around it, so you can see everything. So that's really that bird's eye view that also allows you to get right in. And that's, I think, the most important thing with the drone imagery. The quality of the images allows you to see something from 100 meters up. And then by zooming in, you get to see, okay, I can see as if I was only maybe a foot away from the image. So I think that's the really powerful element of it. And when that then is rendered into a 3D manipulable model, you're replicating almost the experience that you're having with the 360 of you can experience and explore the way you want to. You're not confined to here's the only image. I can only see it from this position. So I think that would be the user experiences that I'm finding from it.
I think from my point of view, drone and 360 are compatible, much similar to the yin and yang, where one of them is on one end of the spectrum in terms of granularity, like the details. That's 360, like you go inside, you look at things in a high detailed way. And then the drone, given the nature that it flies at 40, 50, 60 meters in the air, it gives you like the general perspective of your construction site, including at the same time multiple sections of your project. So if you have, for example, 3 buildings being created at the same time, you actually get all of them in one scene in a drone compared to 360 where you have to jump between one building and the other. And then camera comes in as the hybrid solution between both, where it can both coexist in indoors and outdoors. It can see things from the outer perspective and the inner perspective. Charlie highlighted a really interesting point in terms of like looking at it from the inside and then from the outside, or vice versa, which is brilliant. But we have to take into consideration that, for example, any type of material that goes into a construction site or a building has to first live outside before going inside. So with the drone, you get that like opportunity to measure volumes or to measure dimensions of that raw material before it takes shape inside, which can be a bit difficult once it gets mixed and so on. You also get the geolocation part quite easily compared to the 360. Once we are indoors, 4G, 3G, 2G, GPS, everything goes with the wind. The error margin is exponentially higher. With drone, for example, you get to know, for example, using RTK technology or JCPs or whatever, you can have centimeter accuracy from 80 meters in the air, which is quite astonishing. So when you combine everything together, that's where they start to kind of have each other's back. So if something has one flaw, the other will cover for it, and so on and so forth. And one other thing that I like to talk about when we're doing drone versus 360, drones usually do a top-down capture as compared to 360, which do a capture in all different dimensions, right? Or directions, sorry. So with drone, you create a really nice representation of the 2D compared to 360, which can be used for planning in a gigantic way. So if you have like 10 acres of land and you want to plan, you would really want the drone with its superior speed, with its superior altitude, to go to do the capturing for you, and then the planning phase will start from there. And then when you want the granular detail, you bring the 360 and you're really able to go into every nook and cranny of that space and capture what has to be done versus what was done. So I think that's the main strong suit for both of them.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges in the industry, is trying to educate people in the industry of which one to use at the proper time. There's a lot of challenges in the U.S. specifically around laws as well of using drones to do certain things. Although they can do them quicker, they do take a little bit higher entry to get to use them. I think that's one of the pieces that we've got to do a lot better on that front, to try to educate people on the rules and regulations of what we can do with them. But on a big picture view, like Osama and Charlie, you've explained, it's pretty nice to have that drone to be able to do the big picture of the site versus bringing the 360 inside.
I think the word you just used when you say big picture, where the drone really comes into its own as well, is in those big sites that, you're talking to walk a perimeter. It's not a couple of 100 meters. It could be a couple of miles because of the scale of it. When you see these mission critical projects that are going in, especially in the US, it's just not physically possible for a human to be able to capture all that information. They can stand on the highest cabin in the building and they're still not going to be seeing all those aspects. But when you have that drone capturing all that image, and then again, like the Google Maps experience, you can sit in your desk and explore that, and then go, actually, you know what, I will physically go out and I want to see that piece. But you're not kind of, for want of a better description, you're not wandering around aimlessly in a forest trying to figure out what's going on. And when the trees are there and everything, you can't actually literally see the wood from the trees. With the drone, you are able to get that bird's eye view at the drop of a hat. You just, when you see things now that are becoming increasingly common with drones, of, the drone docks from DJI or Hex 3, I think it's called, that they're automatically doing this constant capture once a day, twice a day. And you're gathering all this information to the point that, okay, you're going to have inspections, which is I'm logging in to my site on the platform and I'm going to inspect visually. Digitally rather than necessarily physically, because the frequency of the data. But I do feel that that's definitely one of where drone does come into its own, is scale. When you are on those big sites, geographically spread out, and you're seeing some of these sites have everything from their own construction fabrication plants on site. So it's not even the building you're looking at anymore. It's the ecosystem that's built up around them to service these large projects. And that's where the drone really comes into its own, and being able to, again, this notion of gathering large volume of data into one place and making it easily accessible.
Which leads into a great point that we talked about, Osama, and Charlie brought it up, was the different tools that's within Evercam's platform for drones, whether that be measurements of volumetrics, or comparisons? Just to explain a little bit about those tools.
We decided to start building drone and then 360 after the camera piece has already been there. So one of the biggest challenges in doing it this way, as opposed to other providers who usually have either 360 drone or a combination of both, is to make them talk to each other and to make a user experience or UI that the user will be able to instantly pick up from one tool to another. So I'm as a user, I'm expecting the same buttons, features, perks that I get in my camera, in my 360, and in my drone, which makes it very interesting to try to consolidate the strength points and the weak points of all of these input platforms into a single screen, let's say. So for example, there are projects that cannot have anything except drone. We've seen use cases of roads being built, which is something that we use in our everyday life so much, but we rarely think about how they're built. So if you're building, for example, 40 miles, a strip of road that goes on 40 miles, 360 is out of the question. You can't walk 40 miles every time you want to measure that. Fixed position camera is out of the question because the construction will literally move. It's like a snake moving down that path, so you can't have fixed position. So drone is your only ally. And it's really interesting like use case to see compared to, for example, building a bridge or a factory or whatever. But in terms of the features themselves, we always try to bring compare, measuring, tagging, snagging, or like taking the images, and the weather. We always try to bring these 5 elements in every system that we create. And then every one of these 5 elements will either talk about to the reconstruction 3D model of that site or the 3D BIM if that doesn't if the reconstruction is not available, for example, in the fixed position cameras case. So when you see these 5 different elements talking to each other from different points of view, you get, for example, a tag that was created in a camera. There's a very interesting point of view because you're looking at the whole picture from a fixed position. A tag that was created from the drone, which usually is on rooftops and is on stockpiles, things that the other input systems rarely deal with. And then a tag that was created from the 360 camera, which basically highlights a single bolt in a single joint in a single door on the 3rd floor, etc. So that's something that the camera or drone, again, rarely get to see. So when you cover these 3 aspects, the only aspect that I would have in mind that I think would be a bit of a hybrid solution and would not necessarily have all of these in real time would be the mobile capture one. Like you just use it usually to do vocal recordings or simple images. So yeah, that's my side of the equation.
And then Charlie, from your side of the equation, the user experience, what are some of the big tools that you like to use in terms of drone functionality?
Yeah, for me, again, the obvious one is just visually what's happening from a different perspective. I'm seeing it like if I'm looking at the fixed position cameras, you get really good at seeing it from the gable end, or I have it 180 at the front because there's a more condensed space to see what the front of the house is. But having those images rendered into a 3D model, I can just go explore. So it's the exploration piece is very, very important. The next one is measurement. So recently I was just having a practical example of was in the office, had to confirm we have a lorry to come in an entranceway to deliver a waste treatment system. So it's a domestic house, so we have waste treatment standalone. And I'm trying to measure out where can this lorry fit in between the house, the existing house, and a shed. And I was able to measure this out. And when I got back, I broke out the actual measurement tape, and it was centimeter accuracy. So to be able to do that and have that confidence to say, well, actually, I know this is going to be done, and this measures up within centimeters of what I'm talking about on it with the actual when I'm standing there was phenomenal. That's the general piece. The constant. I mean, that's the team we have with everything Evercam does. That notion of I have a storage of imagery that even if I'm not certain I need it right now, the fact I know I can come back to it is really, really important. The other piece is stockpiles. So with on-site, we've actually had a lot of internal demolition. So it was a lot of natural stone as well as an old cottage and then recent extensions. So we have it separated, but I will be getting a costing on that to get it taken away. And the fact that I can now measure that up and say how many cubic meters it's going to be required, I can then validate that off when I get a quote. So when the guy comes to site and gives me an eyeball quote and I think it's going to be X, I can now go, okay, let's see how that measures up against what the actual tool is saying. I know I'm only like the examples I'm using here are as a domestic user for once off, but I can see exactly, and that's where our customers are seeing these use cases for this large scale of being able to do this on massive construction sites where huge excavations are being there. The importance now of that, projects that may have certain things like contaminated fill or, waste that have to go away. And now that you can accurately track that, because I mean, for a lot of times in the past, that wasn't those that whether it was one truck or 10 trucks difference wasn't as important as it was. Now those things are fundamentally important, not just from cost, but also because of traceability. So if you go back to the regulation, you have to be able to show exactly what's coming through. So domestically, I'm using the practical terms of inspection, manipulation of the imagery, measurement, just day-to-day productivity usage. I will also then be able to use it for costing. And what we can see with more and more of our clients, especially in sensitive areas where they are having to use contaminated materials, and they now need to measure it. The fact that we can do those things like stockpiles come in. And the latter piece then, or an additional piece, is we also work with quite a number of areas because we're a global company in places like Australia in particular for the mining industry, where stockpile measurement has become that's fundamentally, it's not just a productivity thing, it's an actual end of year. The accountants want to know how much value is left there for my stockpiles as they're sitting there. So that's where I think the use cases of the drone just really come into the fore, that you can get that bird's eye view, you can manipulate your images, but you still have such accuracy with the images that you can still really kind of, as I said with the examples there, get it's almost as good an inspection as if I was standing looking at it myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the piece where you can bring in different overlays and reporting and
exactly
inspections. And Sama, just a little bit about that functionality. Where do you see the product heading on, let's say, overlays?
Our major focus is always going to be about trying to consolidate how the products talk to each other. That's whether we're talking about 360 camera, drone, I can just close my eyes and tell you we're working on making them talk to each other better. That's the first thing. And also we're working on understanding the geolocation of everything better. So when you're talking about a drone, for example, you're using like a GPS coordinate system, and basically the planet is your reference. When you're talking about 360, we forget about the planet, and the building itself is your reference. And basically you switch to more of a Cartesian system, and the GPS system starts to really be shaky. So we're trying to consolidate how a camera fits in all of this, how a 360 fits in all of this, and how a drone can be the basis of GPS based coordinates. So that's the first line of defense, let's say, against making that mistake. And then we're hoping that BIM becomes one of those things that is talking to all the different systems rather than being embedded into them. So usually you get like a 360 system that shows you the BIM on the left side, but that's it. You just see the BIM and you can't do anything else with it. You can annotate it sometimes, but that's about it. What we're trying to do is try to give back to the BIM itself. So if you have to update your timeline, if you have to update your animation, if anything needs to be updated, we're trying to include that into our roadmap. And then also we're trying to improve on the whole self-capture system. A lot of the time, the biggest problem that people have when adopting these systems is they don't know how to use them, and they can be difficult to learn from a perspective of somebody who never touched a drone or a 360. And I'm not just talking about the license itself, but also how it talks to the system. So for example, if we take our modern world of uploading pictures into social media, whether that's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever, when you want to upload something, you know that the user experience is going to probably be the same across multiple apps. Sure, maybe the UI will be slightly different, but the user experience overall will be the same. So that's what we're trying to create in this platform, where no matter where you're coming from, you're actually knowing that you're going to be able to do the exact same pipeline with the exact same people, no amount of training required, just plug and play Evercam systems. So hopefully these are the three main pillars of focus in our next endeavor in the roadmap.
And then Charlie, on your front, the piece that Osama was talking about with, let's say, future enhancements of like overlays, where do you see that coming into play?
I think it goes back to that point we made earlier on about the notion of silos, breaking down the silos. So we've created silos of new images with BIM models, and as I say, that imagery of the future. It's going to be making that as dynamically part of it, as opposed to something that sometimes gets looked at the start of the project and has to be actively pulled into the day-to-day management. We want to make that the platform, that future model lives in your everyday experience, that in the platform, you're when people use a lot of the product, they're talking about live view, but we want to be thinking about the notion of future view, and those two things are sitting side by side, and there isn't a barrier. You don't have to click out of one system to go into another to try and see what that's going to be. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting work being done, as you see, with like kind of VR headsets of people walking around and seeing things like clash detection, etc. Now, that is one of those examples, I think, of the technology being a little bit ahead of where the practical sites are. But if we can do that and make that part of the system, where using the existing, and I'm going to be careful when I use the word dumb capture methods of a 360, so it's just capturing images, and we can make that intelligent, that's where I think we're going to see some really exciting things coming out of it. So again, the point of being like the barrier to entry, the capture has significantly reduced. The skill sets required to do the capture has significantly reduced. So we're continually capturing more and more of this raw data. Then we know there's some very highly intelligent, sophisticated models that are already created, and we start bridging the gap between them. And I think it cannot be overestimated, or rather underestimated, the importance of the user being able to engage with this in a really low friction manner. Because with so many technologies, you can get really excited of them in isolation when you're a specialist in them, but you still have to go, is somebody on site going to use this? Is somebody going to be practical that's going to be, day to day, is just come off site, is just, watch the concrete pour for the last 4 hours in the pouring rain? Are they going to come back into the office and go, yeah, this is something I'm actually going to want to use at, and it's just as easy as using my mobile phone and, exploring that. So I think the thing when we talk about the, where we see the future of the products going with that BIM and the overlays is one that, as Osama mentioned there, that it allows for that user experience to be as good as a social media app, as good as something that you do when you're scrolling at home. And I think that's where I see that excitement coming from, that we already have the models. People want to go and explore a 4D model. They can do it right now, but why don't they? Why is it that a lot of these models sit there statically from the day they're created, maybe get broken out at the end of a month or a quarter for a presentation and gone, oh, that's changed. We really should keep an eye on that, and then almost kind of get put back into the what you call it, back into the cupboard for another couple of weeks until they come back out again to see what the changes are. So we can break that silo, bring it together, give a good positive experience for the user, and that is definitely one of the things we are focusing. In addition to the features, in addition to making more smarter things, it's trying to adoption, making our platform that one place that people can go. And even if they're not fully, if they didn't actively go looking for the BIM model, if they didn't actively go looking for that overlay, the fact is just like, oh, what's this? And they can just see it as part of it. I think that's when you're really going to start seeing construction tech and that visualization and collaboration become another step forward.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things that assists with that is that education of what each of these do effectively, but also trying to do what you're doing right now, which is tying those together, whether it's with the tagging of different things between the different components within the products, or even the timeline, which I think is another aspect of where that's going and how that would help in trying to visually understand all these different components coming together into a reality capture platform. Osama, where's the big benefit of timeline, and where is that going?
I think the way we're seeing timeline going at the moment, and this could evolve any different type of way, by the way. It's a fairly new concept that we're trying to explore, but the way we're seeing it is we will tell the story linearly of a construction site from start to finish. And then what happens during that story is basically data points, whether that's inputs, outputs, export, tag, measure, whatever. Any kind of feature that you will use will be included in that story. And then at the end, this will be basically a glorified UI for a major report of what happened during your construction period. So you get a drone flight. Okay, cool. Put it in there. You get a 360 walkthrough. Okay, cool. Put it in there. The camera captured something and our AI system flagged it as a truck arriving, for example. Okay, cool. Put it in there. Somebody measured, somebody tagged, somebody mentioned, somebody extracted the report, somebody uploaded something external, somebody made a connection to an integration, somebody used an integration. And then you start to kind of go in a gray area between user analytics that you're using for yourself, to improve the product, and user analytics that you give back to your actual user, telling them, look, here's how people in your company are using the product. Here's what you can be doing better. Here's how you can be building literally better pipelines, better construction best practices, better whatever you want to call it, so that's what we're hoping the timeline will do for us. And also, when you're talking about construction in general, you talk about projects that span across years rather than weeks or months like other fields. So in that regard, it's very difficult to find that one piece of information that happened in a split second on a construction site somewhere that really flipped their narrative from everything going smoothly to something really bad had happened. So with the timeline UI, you can actually see that problem happening in that actual time, and you can just simply zoom into it, click on it, and get all the data related, or the closest possible data related to that problem happening, whether that's an incident captured from a camera, from a mobile, from a 360, from a drone, or even if you wanted to check out what the BIM was supposed to tell you versus what the 3D model told you. So that's what I'm really excited about in the timeline.
Yeah, and Charlie, this is a good point on the user experience that hits at the heart of what Osama just said. I think what you're seeing here in the platform is an as-built of the plan. And that is at different stages, all the way from beginning to end, and also even post-construction. So not only for the owner, but for the sub or general contractor to say, okay, and we got another similar building that's coming up in the next few years. How did that play out? And here's everything that we saw and the analytics behind that, the reporting behind that, to better plan projects in the future. Explain how that, where you're seeing that with your house, and obviously other projects that you might see that in the future.
Yeah, I think actually what you were saying there, mentioned, future projects and owners. And I think one of the big things what we're seeing and what we're trying to do, the reality is that construction is more than the people on site. There are so many other personas, and some of those personas are like the end user of it. They're insurance companies. They're government bodies and regulation, which you mentioned in drones. There are so many other personas beyond the construction personas. And what things like timeline do is most people perceive that are not a specialist in a particular topic might think of time and money. That's two things that are transferable, irrespective of what company or business you're in. And being able to take this data and use in a way that's digestible for non-experts, that yes, they may be connected to the project, they may have a vested interest in it, but they're not going to know about, I need to see that weight loading of that beam or the depth of concrete or the conditions, but they just want to know what's going to be done with it. I think that's where the value then starts kicking on beyond the actual just construction site. We then have a data set that we can report on that, as I say, insurance companies will be looking to see, well, I've insured this building, is it on track? They don't really care why it's not on track. They just want to know, is it on track, yes or no? Did they hit their milestones? They don't care about why they didn't. If I'm going to be if I'm looking to say, if I'm thinking my own house, and I'm going to be delivery, I'm not really concerned why something hasn't happened. I just want to know, when's it going to get done, and is it going to cost me money? And if it is, then I'm going to look to delve in. So I think what we're looking to do here is allow different users, and again, particularly to stress this point, outside of the standalone construction activity, to be able to access data at a high level to say, here's something you really want to know. It's either on track or it's on budget or it's not. And then if they want to find out more information, that then they can delve in it and explore it in more detail, so they can start going, okay, my project's not on track. Okay, why? Let's pick that date. It says this milestone was met. We've tagged details, and you can keep going that notion of different layers of detail, that if they want to go from and here's the 360 that shows what actually happened on that day, or here's the image of that project or that accident happening that delayed it, they can do that. So that's a really powerful thing that we want to be able to think about, that in our platform, it isn't just a silo. It isn't just constrained to the people on site. It is so much more. And I think it's a big beast to tackle. It's a big problem to tackle. But the way we're going with it, by having these different forms of data capture and having been able to relay this in images that, and I know it's the fundamental aspect of what is visualization. An image is very easy to understand. Everybody's looking at the exact same thing. It might need a little bit of context, but you can see something did happen, something didn't happen. That's there. So that's the way I see it, as from it evolving. When you mentioned about what the timeline is of the project, it's a core piece of the two things people understand, time and money. And we will eventually, as we get better with tracking the time, be able to start adding the connection to money. So there's no reason, either directly or indirectly through our platform, that there isn't a way, there's a ticking clock that says, here's how much money this is costing you, here's what the delay is. we'll get that fed into us from the other users of the QSs on site, or the insurance companies, or the developers about cost overruns. But that is, all those things start opening up once you get that fundamental foundation built, first of all, through the image capture and the connection between the different data sources.
And then you can really start to dig deep into the lessons learned of why projects succeed and why they fail. And pictures, video, all of what you're developing, that's a major part of how we look back on projects and try to determine not just the numbers behind why they went that. There's always a why, and the picture of that is what's going to show that.
And I think what you will see is retrospectives being done of being able to say, could you have identified this just based on the images? It's going to be a case of, could a third party, because this goes back to that notion of good people and good processes. People learn from previous projects, primarily because those people move from project A to project B, that notion of institutional knowledge getting transferred from one project to another. But if you're able to have that knowledge is transferred through data, and it doesn't require those individuals, those that were working on that project, to be able to say, oh, I'm sharing my experience. And you could say, well, actually, just give me the raw data, we will figure it out from that. Then you really start to be able to say how you could learn from what you call previous projects, because an inherent challenge with most construction is every building is nearly a prototype. Unless you're doing mass manufacturing of, you're copy and pasting the color houses, most major projects are one-off designs. So if you're able to say, actually, we can tell before we started, based on a comparable, doesn't have the exact same, but a comparable project of this nature based on the imagery, these are where things are going. And if we can then say in real time, as something is emerging, it becomes more dynamic. That's really important. We then can start having seen the situation that, rather than being retrospective of what went wrong, we're able to say, based on this is likely to be the outcome. And that's where the AI information is going to start feeding into it.
Yeah, and even if it is a prototype, it's a different site. So that's that's the other biggest challenge, is that you're not just building the same building on the same piece of property you just got done built on. So that's a piece of it, having those lessons learned, and a lot of those lessons learned too are painful. So taking some of the a lot of the failures that occur in construction, but taking some of that documentation and trying to understand that will make our industry better as a whole, and trying to solve some of those challenges. In terms of timeline, what are some of the future enhancements we might see in the future?
I think the major one in terms of timeline user experience, we're trying to enhance the actual user experience of looking at something or looking for something. We're trying to make sure that people, with this whole AI trend happening recently, people are more and more expecting every single IT system to be able to understand what they say, whether that's via text or via vocal notes. So we're hoping that down the road, you'll be able to search for things in Evercam in that major timeline from those different input systems, voice or by text. So say, for example, show me when this happened, and it will show you everything, and then you can make a report out of it, or tag somebody or mention somebody. So that's like the first one. And the second one will be, what do we integrate? When is too much data will basically start to confuse the user. So what do we show at first versus what do we give the power to the user to add eventually? So if you look at it from a perspective of the vertical axis that Charlie talked about earlier, the camera, the drone, the 360, and the BIM, and the AI system, these 5 different elements in a single timeline are borderline overwhelming when you start to think about it from a perspective of somebody who has never seen this much data in a construction site before. And then you start thinking about tagging and measuring and reports and everything else that could happen. So we're trying to consolidate this UI in a way that is easily digestible. I would like to be able, just like Charlie mentioned a moment ago, to be able to know, am I on time? Did I go over budget? Just from looking at the UI at the beginning. And then if I want to get a bit more details, and if I want to go a bit more deeper or in depth, I can just click on a couple of buttons and that will give me whatever I need. So thinking about how that could work for both people who have 40 plus years of experience in the industry compared to people who are coming freshly graduated from whatever field and going into construction, that's like a really interesting challenge to tackle. And then last but not least, the way we jump from one app to another will be significantly enhanced. Right now, our entire industry is based on tabs in a browser, and you just open a new tab and you go to a new app and you do whatever you want. And the Evercam platform, we're strongly trying to build a single tab experience where basically whenever you need something, you just click on it and it will instantly show right in front of you. You don't need a new login or a new session or a new system. So Timeline will be like a very strong foundation for us to build that system on top of.
Yeah, and I think there's just some major points. One of the biggest challenges in our industry is when did it happen? So the ability to be able to search and allow that to automatically come up is a major point. And I also think the other piece that you talked about, some of that's important to note, is the ability to get that reporting to the forefront of that and not having to jump between different platforms. Charlie, what have you seen on the user front on that?
The big piece I see is now that we go back to the notion of a 360 drone images as well as a fixed position camera, and the fact that they're just all in the one place. I'm just, I'm using it for my own experience, as I said, from as a client use, that I can just monitor, I can just do a casual look. Then I want to go in and do more of analysis. I can, I want to measure something, I can track. I'm in the one platform. I'm not having to jump to, here's my 360 app or here's my drone app. That piece from it is really, really important from it. And the simplicity then of from a data capture point of view. So because I'm doing the 360 walkthroughs myself, I have my own drone, I do the the drone imagery. The fact it's so simple, just upload experiences. As Osama mentioned earlier on, that notion of the UI might be slightly different when you upload an image, but it's the same process. I mean, we don't even have that. Like the imagery, the UI is the same, whether it's uploading 360 or drone, it's just virtually the same process. So I think that where we're going with this notion of that one tab experience, what it starts doing is putting the user at the heart of our technology. Like a lot of technology goes through this same life cycle where, first of all, it's specialist and only the experts know how to use it. And they learn how to work around the system rather than the system working around the individual. What we're getting to a stage is like we've now got so many pillars, like those pillars that we spoke about like we've got the BIM, we've got the drone, we've got the fixed position, we've got the 360. So you have those four kind of visual inputs. And now we've got the features, which Osama says transfers through each product, which is like you've got your compare, you've got your weather, etc. So you can do that. Now we're enhancing it with timelines. So it's becoming smarter and more intelligent. And it's all in that one place. Because like construction, and it's not unique, but like construction is not the fastest adopter of technology, primarily because they're busy. There's so much crap going on. It's not, you usually don't have a chance to sit down and look at a computer, because the inherent way good construction works is because while we may show it in a linear manner, it isn't. It's like, here's your Gantt chart that's meant to go like this, when in fact it kind of went left, right, up, down, and a squiggle in the middle. But if they're able to get that simple experience where you've reduced that barrier, you've reduced that fatigue, tab fatigue or whatever, or app fatigue, then it starts to become something that people go, actually, this is actually useful to me. This is as good as a good drill or a good tool. It's not something that's, oh crap, I have to log into the system to do ... It's actually, yeah, I want to log into this because this is actually going to save me time. So I think that's where we're really transitioning. The industry is, and I think that's what we're trying to lead ahead with, is transitioning to be a user-centered platform rather than a platform that has products, that has features. And you'll just bring that together and somebody will actually go, yes, this is actually going to make my life a lot easier.
The final question I have for both of you is this: what does the future look like for photo documentation?
More of it. I know it is becoming that like fast food. It's just loads of it. It's going to be cheaper. It's going to be more frequent. It's going to be a higher quality, and that's in terms of so the barrier to capture is increasingly going down all the time, and then the value that's going to be extracted from an automatic point of view from an AI is going to exponentially increase. So the first one will happen faster. It's already well in transit, but I'm very confident that the value that's going to come out with AI in the next 6-12 months is going to see a significant increase because it's going to have more and more data points. So those two things are where I see it on the spectrum.
I agree with Charlie on these points, and I would like to add that also the fact that it will not be optional anymore, in my opinion, will drive a lot of value in the construction industry. So right now, you can, technically speaking, on 50% of the construction sites live in the world right now, just have a simple photo documentation system, whether that's camera, drone, or 360, but you don't have to have all of them. You don't have to have everything all the time. And that makes it so difficult to go back and track what went wrong at any point in time. We, as a company, are seeing that it's actually difficult when you have all three pillars working together so well. It's still difficult to know what went wrong at a certain point in time. So it's really astonishing that some people are still not adapting that technology. So I think in the future, the technologies will be adapted more in a, like, enforced by law, in my opinion. Like, you will have to have drone, you will have to have 360, your BIM has to be up to date. You have to have some sort of company or system that basically gives you these reports. You have to include AI, like Charlie said, in your system, and you have to train people, just like you have any construction industry, construction site right now has to train people on safety regulations, how to use, for example, this or that. You have to train people on how to capture data, how to input it, how to edit it, how to export it. So it will be like a central piece. And like I said, it will warp the way the construction pipeline or the best practices work to be around it, rather than to include it somehow as a foreign or hybrid solution. I think that's what will happen in the future.
Well, I wanted to thank both of you for joining us today, and we will definitely continue this conversation on photo documentation. And thank you for joining us on the BIM Hero podcast.
Thank you very much, Cody.
Thank you for hosting.